Hi everyone, I'm Meg from FarmSource and welcome to Tuesday's Calf Week webinar. First, I'd just like to apologise about the postponing of this webinar last week due to the famous Waikato fog, but we couldn't do much about that, can we? Today, I would like to welcome Dr. Racheal Bryant, who is our guest speaker today. Racheal is Senior Lecturer at Lincoln University and Researcher in Dairy Production Systems. Today, Racheal is going to talk to us about artificial rearing and specifically the considerations of pre-weaning and feeding regime found within the study, and I'll just let you get into that a wee bit more. But before I hand over to you, Racheal, I would just like to use this opportunity to remind everyone to head over to the Calf Week website, enter in the Calf Shed Grand Designs competition using your top tip and send in the photo upload and to win a grand prize. Also head over there if you've missed any of this week's Calf Week webinars. They've been recorded and uploaded on the website. So over to you. Thanks, Racheal.
Thanks, Meg, and thanks to FarmSource for inviting me to give this presentation. And I'm just going to share my screen. So what I'm going to, what I've been asked to talk to you about today is some of the research that I've been involved in with respect to calf rearing, and just to put at the start what the research objectives were and why we did the investigations. And we were really wanting to look at the impact of pre-weaning milk allocation on both the growth of the calf in the short term and the long-term performance of those replacement heifers. And those specific research objectives are related to our conventional rearing systems where we separate cows and calves. But there was a secondary question around what would be the impact of keeping cows and calves together in both the short term and the long term. And I guess there's always got to be a why when we do this research, and part of my why for the questions were around the evidence coming through from overseas research, where they have done quite a lot of work looking at pre-weaning growth rate and milk yield of heifers in their first and subsequent lactations, comparing that to how they performed as calves, and looking at that relationship between pre-weaning growth rate and lifetime performance. And those systems, where admittedly they are total mixed ration systems, there has shown to be some positive relationships between milk yield performance as adults for calves that have higher pre-weaning growth rates. But New Zealand's not the same as overseas, where we're limited by pasture and our ability to fully feed calves. So the research questions that we had were really wanting to understand whether or not these relationships held in New Zealand pastoral systems. That second research objective around cow-calf contact was really linking to what some of the challenges might be going forward as consumer pressures start to increase, and awareness of our animal husbandry systems might impact the way we produce our milk. And to drive that point home, the impact of public perceptions and market requirements has affected our farming practices historically, and immediately we're aware that the phasing out of caged eggs has impacted egg supply and egg prices. There's been a lot of debate over the use of farrowing crates or not using farrowing crates, live export, bobby calves, and concern is that the next cab off the rank is around that separation of cows and calves within 24 hours of birth, and if in our dairy pastoral systems, if we don't do that, what sort of outcomes might we expect? So those were some of the reasons driving the different research objectives of the study that we've done. So the research itself, it's work that we're doing over 3 years, and Each year we have 3 cohorts of calves, and they represent 3 different milk feeding regimes. And the first cohort is our control group, which is industry best practice of offering 6 litres per calf per day, and I'm calling that ARC because that's artificial rearing and control. The second treatment is increasing the milk allowance for calves in that artificial rearing situation where calves are removed within a day from their dam. And over the 2 years, we've offered either 8 or 9 litres per calf per day, and I'm calling that one ARH for high allowance. And the third treatment is the full cow and calf contact. So that's essentially ad lib milk for those calves that are suckling with their dams. So they, just in general, the artificially reared calves have had access to meal essentially from birth in the calf rearing facility. But as we've been recruiting the calves, so we don't recruit all the calves in the experiment in one day, so it's taken us about 2 to 2.5 weeks to recruit the calves. And once they're all recruited, then we allow them to go outdoors and have access to pasture. The calves that are suckling with their dams, as you might guess, they have access to pasture from the day they're born. So far we've done 2 seasons, and I'm going to talk about the differences that we've had amongst those treatments over the last couple of seasons. And the aim of this research is to follow these replacement heifers over their lifetime. So the first season we did this was the 2021-22 season. So the calves born from these treatments will be milking next season, so they're going to be calving in a couple of months, and so we'll be following them through. But the treatments that these calves were involved in was that we had 15 calves in each group, so we had 15 calves getting 6 litres per day and 15 calves getting 8 litres of milk per day. And in 2021, we used whole milk from the vat, and we had set up a single stall robotic lily feeder, so we could monitor the suckling behaviour of the calves, how much milk they drank and how often they visited and things like that. The cows that were suckling with their calves, we milked those cows once per day while the calves were with them. So basically we were bringing the cows and the calves to the shed every afternoon and milking those cows, and then taking them back to the paddock together. And in the first year we let the calves go to the shed with their dams. After 6 weeks we separated those calves and milked the cows twice a day from 6 weeks after calving. And when we separated the calves after 6 weeks so around the 27th of September, we knew their rumens weren't developed enough for them to be just on pasture. So we had the I guess unenviable job of teaching those calves how to feed off the cafeteria, which is that photo in the top right hand corner. These calves weighed anywhere from 60 to 80 kilos, I guess, when we separated them at 6 weeks. So it was a 2-person job per calf to teach those calves how to use the feeder. From there, we were able to transition them off milk to weaning, so that they were weaned at about 10 weeks of age. And throughout the study, we were herd testing regularly because we wanted to know what impact the treatments had on the dam and on her milk composition and quality, and her udder health with the somatic cell counts. And we were also weighing the calves pretty regularly as well to look at their growth rates. So just staying with the methodology approach before I get into the results, we did things slightly differently in the second year. So last season we had our second cohort of cows in the 2022-23 season, and what we did was for the high allowance calf group, we increased milk from 8 to 9 litres per calf per day to try and get bigger differences in intake and growth rate. And we only had 12 calves per treatment. We were trying to get 15, but it was taking us a bit longer to get 15 calves, and I didn't want them to have too much variation in their age, so to try and keep them all within being born within 2 weeks. So we had 12 calves in each group. Now the suckling calves ended up staying with their mothers or their dams for a full 10 weeks. So we essentially weaned them off their dams, but we tried to do this in a phased approach where after 6 weeks, rather than separating the calves completely, we only separated them at night. So we started milking the cows twice a day at 6 weeks, and the calves stayed in their farmlet paddock. And by farmlet paddock, this cartoon drawing is basically a diagram of how we'd set up the paddocks in the calf suckling area. So there's a 4 hectare night paddock there, which we put the cows into and break fed at night. And when they were together full time during the day, they stayed in that lighter green area. The blue dots are just troughs that we had in the system. And we were using the spring rotation planner to allocate area and supplement to cows within that system. And the calves had access to shelter anytime they wanted it behind a single wire fence. So the cows couldn't get to the shelter, but the calves could. And that was the same for the previous year. We had the shelter that we moved. We were able to tow it behind the quad bike, and the calves had access to meal inside the shelter. So again, like with the previous season, we weaned the calves off their dams at 10 weeks of age on the 20th of October, and we continued in this season to measure calf growth and dam milk yield and composition. What we also did was we wanted to look at the impact that these different feeding systems had on passive immunity transfer. And I know Emma Cuddance and Mike Shellcross have talked a bit about this and the importance of this. So the way the system was set up with our artificially reared calves, we had once a day pickup unless it was raining. And those calves would be brought in the middle of the day after milking, sort of mid-morning. And by that afternoon, the farm staff would give first milking colostrum to the calves, and if they didn't suckle from a bottle, then they were tube fed. So most of the ARC and ARH calves received first milking colostrum within about 24 hours, and that would be on top of anything that they suckled. On the other hand, the calves that were reared with their dams, we essentially let the mother do the rearing and had minimal intervention from farm staff other than navel disinfection, which all calves were treated with iodine. And we found, what you can see from the graph there is that there were a small proportion of calves that did fail to acquire passive immunity, and we set the threshold for that as 50 grams per litre of serum total protein, and that was in the first year that was more prominent in the suckling group, with about 30% of the calves failing to acquire passive immunity transfer. But a bit of variation between years, as you can see. So in terms of the growth rates and the performance of the calves, the artificially reared calves, whether they were on 8 or 9 litres, grew a little bit faster than the control calves on 6 litres, but the difference in growth rate wasn't statistically different. So at weaning, they were only about 5 kilos different in live weight in either of the years, and you can see the 2 lines that are quite close together for both of the years, showing that they're giving an extra 2 or 3 litres per day didn't make a big difference to live weight gain. yet when we compare that with the suckling calves. They grew much faster. They were growing over a kilo a day at times, and they were weaned at about 15 to 20 kilos heavier at the same time as the artificially reared calves. So those calves were consuming a lot of milk, and you'll see that when I show you the cows' results. But I just want to explain why we didn't see as big a difference in the artificially reared calves as we expected. And the reason for that is, although we had set the feeding plans and the automatic feeder for calves to have a maximum entitlement of either 8 litres in year 1 or 9 litres in year 2, on average the calves in those groups only drank about 7 litres per day, compared to about 5.6 litres per day from the calves in the control group. So if I want those calves to increase their milk intake, then in future, then I'd need to set the entitlement a bit higher than the 6 litres to ensure that they actually get that minimum amount of milk. But this graph, what it does is show you how, using the automatic feeder, show you with each day on the feeding plan, and they were on the feeding plan for 80 days. The calves were transitioned up to 9 or 6 litres from 4 litres for the first 4 days when they got colostrum, and there's quite a bit of variation in terms of the average intake of how much those calves drank each day. And when I do this next slide, you can see where it's a messy looking diagram, but these are all the individual calves intake and how much they bounce around in terms of what those calves consume. So a lot of variation amongst the different individuals that come into those automatic feeders. So the next part of the research question was the impact on the dam and what happens to milk yield. And what we found was that in both seasons, the cows that were suckling their calves had significantly less milk than the cows that had been separated from their calves at day 1. So the difference in milk yield or milk harvested in the first year was 618 litres after 6 weeks. So keeping in mind that we only kept the calves on for the first 6 weeks in year 1, and then we kept the calves for 10 weeks with their mothers in the second year. And that first graph on the left there shows that the milk yield on average while those calves and cows were together was about 8 litres. And this varied from anywhere from 2 litres per cow to about 12 to 15 litres per cow. The reason for the much lower milk yield is partly to do with the obvious that the calf is consuming it, but we also believe that there is some variation in letdown as well with cows that are both suckling and having milk harvested. Following separation, when those cows go into a twice a day milking, there's been no significant difference in milk yield between the control group and the suckling group. The graph that I've shown you here is just the graphs from the first year of the study. I'm still doing the statistics and waiting for the cows to be dried off for the second year study. The graph on the right hand side that shows last year's somatic cell count results. So in both graphs, the closed or dark black circles are the control group and the open circles are the cows in the suckling group. And last year the somatic cell count on average was a bit lower for the suckled group and was higher. So there was a couple of incidences of mastitis in the control group. In the second season, the situation is reversed, where the somatic cell count has been higher in the suckling group and lower in the control group. And looking at the literature from overseas where they've done this sort of research, there doesn't seem to be a clear correlation between suckling and mastitis, and the scientists concluded that there are the other management factors are more important at influencing somatic cell and mastitis risk than whether or not cows are suckled. One thing that has stood out as an effect of suckling is the lower milk fat percent, and this has been consistent in both seasons where we've done this research. Milk fat percentage is significantly lower in suckled cows compared to cows in the control group, and these results are consistent with findings from overseas as well. And again, that will be related to changes in milk secretion. On the other hand, there's been no significant effect of suckling or not suckling on the milk protein percent, and this is also consistent with findings from overseas. So in terms of some general observations about cows and calves, where probably some of it's more anecdotal, I guess farmers will be interested to know how much milk is lost, and when we kept cows and calves together, that loss of milk yield was about 1,000 litres compared to 600 litres in the first seasons, so about 100 litres a week. The suckling system is definitely more labour intensive. In the second year, we kept the calves in the paddock and brought the cows out separately, and that required 2 herders, one to hold the gate and draft, and another herder to round up the cows. And it took about 2 to 3 weeks for cows and calves to get into a bit of a rhythm to come out of the paddock. We did get to the point where we only needed 1 herder, and the cows were doing the drafting for us. So the cows would push the calves away from the gate for us, but that took a wee while at a busy time of the year. We didn't notice any teat damage from the suckling calves in the first year when they were separated at 6 weeks, but in the second year when calves got bigger and they stayed on their dams until 10 weeks, we did notice some damage to the teats. The damage clears up once the cows and calves are separated, but some photos there of probably the worst case scenarios in terms of teat damage that was observed. The other thing that we noticed is that the suckling calves were drinking a lot of milk, and they had they were scouring quite heavily. They were healthy calves, so we're attributing it to nutritional scours, and that top photo there shows one calf that's a little bit dirty, but for the most part, the calves were kept very clean, and the dams licked and cleaned their calves and kept them cleaner than the calves were in the rearing shed. Very rapid growth rate, which I've shown you, and in spite of the reduction in harvested milk yield, the suckling dams have maintained a higher body condition score throughout the season. So they're about, in the first year, 0.2 points higher in body condition score through the season, and this year we're as we get close to dry off, it's the body condition score difference is about 0.5 higher in the suckling compared to the control group. So that brings me to the end of my talk, and I'd just like to acknowledge the farm team and my technician, who without their support and their diligence and data collection, I wouldn't be able to do this.
Thanks very much, Racheal. Super interesting study and so much information there. It's definitely amazing what's been happening. it makes me think about my own calf rearing scheme, really. What are we doing? Is this an opportunity going forward? I do have a few wee questions, actually. So in the 2021 study, you mentioned about the calves needing topped up after the 6 weeks. How did you know that the rumen wasn't developed?
Yeah, good question. It was their dung was the indicator to me, because their dung had a consistency of very high milk intake, so the dung's actually almost white. So what we wanted to do was with both seasons was actually reduce how much milk they were drinking, and see evidence that they were increasing their solid feed intake through the dung. We were collecting blood samples to confirm that. So the beta hydroxybutyrate is a good indicator of rumen development, but we weren't going to have that data straight away at the time that we're making these decisions. So we used their dung to help us.
Cool. Another question I'm sure everyone wanting to know: how did the calves and cows react to the separating at 6 and 10 weeks?
Okay, I do have a slide to show this, because I thought you might ask.
Yes.
The approach that we used was basically for someone to stand and listen to cows calling, and in the first year we were unable to do this because of COVID restrictions and trying to limit the number of visitors on farm, and just not having enough labour to listen to vocalizations. But what I've put up here is the vocalizations that were recorded when cows were when they were brought in for milking, and they were basically scored or counted each day for several days. And we started doing the vocalization measurements at 6 weeks, when the calves were on went to day-night separation. And you can see there that we were trying to separate them gradually, but that night separation really upset the cows. The calves were less distressed by the separation, but the cows, and they were quite variable with the different personality types. There was a lot of vocalization, so that's something that we're going to try and manage a bit better when we do next season's calf study. And the second peak there is the vocalization at weaning, which isn't as high as their first separation. So the cows are sort of starting to become a little bit more accustomed to being separated from their calves. You can see that it does settle down quite quickly. Like there's a what I'd call an acute phase almost, where there's a lot of bellowing, but the process that we used this current season was a lot more protracted than the first year when we abruptly separated them. The cows were upset, but they got over it sooner, rather than having on and off contact like we had this year.
Cool. Yeah, no, super interesting. Another question: why do you think that the difference in the couple of litres differences, so the 6 litres compared to like the 8 per day, why did you think that it didn't have such a large impact on the live weight?
Two reasons. Because the difference in milk intake was very small, so it only ended up just being over 1.5 litres. And the other reason is that the calves can then compensate. So there was no restrictions on how much meal or pasture they had access to. So the calves that are more restricted would have likely made up a lot of that energy deficit by consuming more meal and more grass. So one, the difference between milk intake was only smaller than what we planned, and two, the cows can compensate with meal and pasture.
Cool. Yeah. Just last one from me, just from practical farmers out there, calf rearers looking into this, based on what you've learned and what you think, do you think this is possible for the future? Is this a feasible thing to leave calves on cows?
Where there's a will, there's a way, and we know that there are some farmers doing it, and overseas there's I guess it's more common in organic farms or using nurse cows. I think there are a lot of challenges, I think, to overcome, particularly in the first, during calving, because cows are coming in all the time at different times and they're very attentive to their calf. But other challenges include things that Emma Cuddance has done a lot of research into, and that's the actual suckling. I think to get that passive immunity transfer, we would need intervention, because not all calves actually suckle, and we had a couple of pairs that we ended up removing because we didn't see the calf suckle at any time in that first 24 hours, even though the dam was licking and the calf was trying to drink. Neither of them had a clue what to do. So we removed those animals. So
yeah, cool.
So there's challenges.
Yeah, for sure, like everything, as we know. That's everything from me. So once again, thanks so much, Racheal, for taking time out of your day and present here today.
Pleasure.
Once we've got it. We really appreciate everything and sharing your knowledge with us, all the insight that you've shared with us today. So going forward, guys, if you've got any questions for Racheal, feel free to send them on through via email. Would be perfect. Racheal.bryant@lincolnuni.ac.nz.
Lincoln.ac.nz.
Sorry, yeah, perfect. So she's happy to answer any of those questions. And that's all from me. Once again, thanks for being here today. And I hope you guys enjoyed this webinar. Thank you.